With all due respect, ma'am, this simulator isn't a video game. It's for pilots. The words, spoken by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Garrett Vance, dripped with condescension, echoing in the sterile hush of the flight briefing room. The small crowd of aviators, all officers and warrant officers, shifted with a mix of amusement and discomfort. A few nervous chuckles broke the tension, isolating the lone figure standing before the console. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova offered no reaction. Her face remained a placid mask, her eyes fixed not on her detractor, but on the pre-flight checklist she held in her steady hands. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a gesture so devoid of emotion it seemed to absorb the insult entirely. At the back of the room, Colonel Hayes watched, his gaze bypassing Vance's performative arrogance. He focused instead on Rostova's posture, on the profound stillness of her hands. It was a stillness he recognized, not the rigid grip of anxiety, but the deep, settled calm of someone who had lived so long in the heart of the storm that chaos had become their native element. He saw a professional so confident in her craft that the opinions of lesser men were like wind against a mountain. If you believe competence speaks louder than condescension, type silence below. The setting was the Army's new Advanced Aviation Combat Simulator, a multi-million-dollar behemoth designed to push pilots to their absolute breaking point and beyond. Vance was its gatekeeper, the lead instructor whose job it was to separate the best from the rest. Master Sergeant Rostova was an anomaly, an NCO sent from a vague liaison program to evaluate the new system. To Vance, her presence was an affront. He saw her quiet demeanor not as discipline, but as timidity, her enlisted rank not as a mark of experience, but as a disqualifier. He was determined to make a public example of her, to expose the absurdity of sending a non-pilot to test a pilot's crucible. The scenario is a catastrophic dual-engine failure, Vance announced, his voice booming with theatrical authority as he programmed the console. Zero visibility, mountainous terrain, full passenger load. The failure rate for experienced pilots in this sim is 98%, he smirked at Rostova. Just try to keep it level, Sergeant. We'll send in the virtual rescue team for you. The other pilots watched, a silent jury to a trial whose verdict Vance had already declared. But Rostova simply stepped toward the simulator door, her movements economical and precise. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Her silence was an answer Vance was not yet equipped to understand. Inside the darkened cockpit, the world was a symphony of calm. Rostova's hands moved with a liquid grace across the control panels, each flick of a switch and press of a button a note in a well-rehearsed composition. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic, a human metronome against the low hum of the machine. Vance, watching from the instructor's station, gestured to the main screen where her vitals were displayed. Heart rate is 62. He scoffed to the pilot next to him. She doesn't even grasp the danger. He hit the initiation key. Instantly, the simulated world erupted. A violent shudder ripped through the cockpit, followed by the deafening shriek of alarms and the panicked voice of the synthesized co-pilot screaming about engine flameouts. The controls went slack in her hands, the aircraft now a multi-ton brick falling from a digital sky. On the monitor, the helicopter was in a death spiral, plunging toward the jagged, unseen peaks below. Vance leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, a smug look of vindication on his face. He was waiting for the crash, for the screen to flash red with failure, for the final confirmation of his own superior judgment. He was waiting for her to panic. He was waiting for her to break. But Rostova did not break. She did not fight. In the heart of the simulated chaos, she became an island of profound calm. Instead of wrestling with the dead controls, she eased into the fall, embracing the physics of failure. Her hands moved with an impossible delicacy, guiding the aircraft into a perfect state of auto-rotation, a controlled descent using only the upward flow of air through the unpowered rotor blades. She was no longer flying a machine. She was dancing with gravity, making a partner of the very force trying to destroy her. She ignored the useless visual displays, closing her eyes for a moment to listen. She was listening for the subtle changes in the rotor's whine, feeling the faintest vibrations through the floor, navigating by a sixth sense forged in thousands of hours of real darkness. On the monitor in the control room, The impossible was happening. The red descent vector began to flatten. The helicopter, once a plummeting coffin, was now gliding like a sycamore seed. Vance shot forward in his chair, his arrogance melting into sheer, unadulterated disbelief. He watched as she feathered the collective at the last possible second, bleeding off the final remnants of energy to execute a flawless, zero forward speed landing in a tiny, simulated clearing no larger than a backyard. The simulation ended. On the screen, green letters glowed in the silent room. Successful landing. Zero hull stress. A thick, suffocating silence fell over the control room. The nervous chuckles were gone, replaced by the sound of held breath. Vance stared at the screen, his mouth agape, his mind refusing to process the data before him. No, he whispered, the single word of fragile defense against an overwhelming reality. That's not possible. He ran the diagnostics, convinced of a glitch, a system error, a cheat. The machine confirmed its own integrity. The performance was real. Just then, Colonel Hayes moved from the back of the room. He walked past the stunned aviators with a deliberate stride, his expression unreadable. He ignored Vance's frantic search for an explanation and stepped up to the main console. With a few keystrokes, he bypassed the simulator's interface and accessed the network's central personnel database. He typed in a single name, Rostova, E. Her file appeared on the main screen, a simple, unassuming block of text. For a moment, it looked as plain as the woman herself. Then, with another command, Hayes unlocked the security classifications. The screen flickered, and the file expanded, a cascade of clearances and commendations flooding the display, each line landing like a hammer blow in the silent room. Name, Rostova Eva. Rank, Master Sergeant. Hayes read, his voice calm but carrying the weight of ultimate authority. Unit, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. The Night Stalkers, a legendary, almost mythical unit. Flight hours, over 4,000, 90% under night vision goggles. Designations, fully mission qualified, flight instructor, standardization pilot. Vance's face had gone pale. The list continued, a relentless drumbeat of excellence. Commendations, distinguished flying cross with valor. Multiple air medals with V device. Mission history, classified. Hayes paused, letting the weight of that single word settle. He then pointed to a final line at the bottom of the screen. Notes, subject matter expert in total system failure exfiltration under extreme conditions. As the simulator door hissed open, Rostova stepped out, her expression as placid as it had been when she entered. Colonel Hayes turned to face her, drew himself to his full height, and rendered a salute so sharp, so precise. It was a weapon in itself. Master Sergeant, he said, the title now infused with a profound and undeniable respect. Hayes held the salute for a long moment before turning his steely gaze on Vance and the assembled pilots. Gentlemen, he began, his voice low and cutting, your assumptions were loud today. Her competence was silent. What you just witnessed wasn't a trainee failing a simulation. It was a master validating its authenticity. He gestured back to the screen. Master Sergeant Rostova didn't just pass this scenario. She wrote the operational doctrine for it. She did it for real, over a mountain range that doesn't appear on any public map, with a real crew and real consequences. The only reason she's here is to determine if our multi-million-dollar box can accurately replicate the impossible feat she's already proven is possible. He let his words hang in the air, a final indictment of their prejudice. She wasn't sent here to learn from you, Chief. You were all meant to learn from her. Lesson 1. The most dangerous person in the room is often the quietest. Lesson 2. Respect is earned through action, not demanded by rank. He looked directly at Vance. Dismissed, the word was an execution. The story of the Rostova auto-rotation spread through the base like wildfire. It became a new kind of institutional myth, whispered in hangars and retold over drinks at the officers' club. The digital recording of her perfect run was quietly disseminated, becoming mandatory viewing for every new pilot. It was a masterclass not just in technical skill, but in composure. The quiet Master Sergeant had, in 30 seconds of simulated crisis, recalibrated the entire culture of the flight school. Vance was a changed man. The brittle arrogance was gone. replaced by a deep, unsettling humility. A few days later, he found Rostova in a maintenance hangar, inspecting a rotor assembly. He didn't offer a clumsy, fumbling apology. Instead, he approached her as a student. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice stripped of its former bluster. "I was watching the playback. Your RPM control. It was flawless. How did you feel it dropping without instruments?" Rostova paused, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. She looked at him, not with triumph, but with the simple clarity of a teacher. "You don't feel it, Chief," she said, her voice even and calm. "You listen for the silence between the warning alarms. The machine tells you everything is wrong. The silence tells you what to do about it." In that moment, she wasn't just explaining a technique. She was passing on a philosophy. The legacy of that day became etched into the institution itself. Colonel Hayes, without ceremony, pinned the printout of Rostova's simulation results to the main briefing room bulletin board. The bold, green letters spelling "successful landing" and the circled "zero hull stress" became a new standard, a silent testament to a mastery that defied explanation. It hung there next to the official flight safety posters, a quiet but powerful reminder that the regulations were only the beginning, and that true excellence lived in a place beyond the checklist. New pilots would see it and ask about its meaning, and the older instructors would tell the story of the quiet NCO who came to validate a machine and ended up re-educating an entire generation of aviators. The incident became a teaching point, a parable about the profound danger of underestimation and the immense power of quiet professionalism. It was a story about the difference between a loud voice and a steady hand, between the appearance of authority and its quiet, undeniable reality. Months later, the impact was tangible. The simulator scenarios had been completely overhauled, made more difficult and more nuanced based on Rostova's detailed feedback. The training culture had shifted, with a newfound respect for the deep well of experience held by senior NCOs. Chief Warrant Officer Vance was now the program's most effective instructor, precisely because he used his own story as a cautionary tale. He would often stand before a new class of pilots, point to the aging printout on the wall, and say, "Look at that. That piece of paper is the most important lesson you will learn here. It has nothing to do with what you say, your rank, or where you think you belong. It has everything to do with what you can do when the engines quit and the sky is falling." That is the standard. The legend of the quiet professional became a foundational part of their identity, a moral compass pointing toward a truth that was proven, not proclaimed. True legacy, the story taught, wasn't what you left behind in a file, but what continued forward in the actions and attitudes of others. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.